This is BD World. I am SHABAHAT. You are watching Fault Lines. Ladies and gentlemen, the flash floods of 2022 have surpassed expectations of everyone in this country. Not that we have not seen devastations and catastrophes in the past. The 2005's earthquake, 2010's flash flood that wiped out many districts in Sindh, again the flash flood of 2011 were all examples of the devastation that we have seen on the national canvas. And as a nation, we have coped up with all these challenges with diligence and with grace. But 2022's flash flood have given an unprecedented scale of devastation. As you might have noticed in our previous program, the flow of rivers in times have been more than 10 times of their natural flow or their general flow. All of this has created a host of crises. Almost 1,400 lives have been lost. 500,000 cattle and many crops are under the water, entirely washed away in many areas. Besides that, there is a number of health issues that Pakistan is facing at the moment. Amid all of this, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was on an official visit of Pakistan. He made some remarkable statements while being on visit by the state officials, and one of the remarkable statements that I would want to quote is that voice of United Nations will be the voice of Pakistan. Our team has prepared the package. Watch the package before I bring my first guest to the program.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is paying a two-day visit to Pakistan to express solidarity with the country braving a colossal climate-induced natural disaster. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres visited National Flood Response and Coordination Center in Islamabad, where they were briefed about the damages caused by floods and the rehabilitation work. UN chief underlined that Pakistan's contribution to climate change is minimal, but it is one of the countries most affected by its consequences. Speaking at the briefing, the Premier thanked the UN chief for undertaking the visits, saying that his empathy and support is great encouragement elucidating massive rescue and relief operations. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said that efforts are underway and flood affectees were being moved to safer areas while also being provided food and shelter. Prime Minister Shehbaz further underlined that Pakistan is doing its best with its meager resources, and he extended gratitude to international community for contributing, while emphasizing that unless we get sufficient support in terms of relief, in terms of repairing the damage, it will be in trouble. Welcoming the arrival of the UN Secretary General to Pakistan, Minister for Information and Broadcasting Mariam Aurangzeb stated that visit of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres to Pakistan will help highlight the problems and difficulties faced by flood victims at global level. Earlier, Pakistan's Ambassador Munir Akram reminded the international community that Pakistan's contribution to global greenhouse gas emission is negligible, but it's facing deadliest consequences of the changes caused by these emissions. Amnesty International underlined that wealthier states that have responsibility for climate change must remedy historic injustices and support low-emitting countries like Pakistan after deadly floods have shown the devastating impact of climate change.
Ladies and gentlemen, since the visit of Secretary General of United Nations is a major diplomatic event, everything apart, we have invited Pakistan's permanent representative in the United Nations, Ambassador Munir Akram, to be our inaugurating guest in the program today. Ambassador Saab, welcome to the show. Ambassador Munir Akram, can you hear me? Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador Munir Akram cannot hear us, and while we are trying to fix the audios, let me remind you that these flash floods have brought devastations that Pakistan has not faced in the past. And all of this has happened in the times when Pakistan was facing a huge economic challenge. Remember the programs that we were doing on the economic crisis of the country before the last week of August, when this catastrophe hit Pakistan so immensely. Pakistan was struggling for a tranche of IMF grant of 1.16 billion US dollars, and 1.16 billion dollar was having a detrimental economic impact. I mean, the absence or the delay of the package was having a devastating impact on our economy. Now, according to some estimates made by autonomous and independent research tanks or think tanks, the damages that Pakistan has faced so far, only in the recent flash floods, is costing us more than 20 billion US dollars. Some say it's 30 billion dollars, some say it's 20, but anywhere between 20 to 30 billion US dollars. Now imagine we require somewhere between 20 to 30 billion US dollars of expenditure just to be back where we used to be before the last week of August. And certainly it was not a very pleasant economic situation. Nonetheless, the economic management team of the government of Pakistan has went every mile to come out of the crisis that we have been facing. Now, not only this has costed the livelihood, it has also hit the agriculture, which is the mainstay of Pakistan's economy. And this gives birth to a diversity of crisis that is quite perplexed in nature, and things are quite interconnected in this regard. For instance, the province of Sindh, that has taken the worst brunt of the water, and most part of Sindh is under the water as of now when we speak. Sindh produces a large proportion of our cotton crop. Now, cotton crop consequently is utilized by the textile industry, and it's the textile industry that helps Pakistan's to create the exports. Most of the exports that Pakistan make are out of this cotton industry. Ambassador Munir Akram Sheikh, can you hear me now? Ambassador Munir Akram, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
So, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the nation's Secretary General is on an official visit of Pakistan, and we understand your office has done a lot of homework since all of this is happening at a time when Pakistan needs the attention of international community. Tell us a bit more about it.
Well, as you know, the Secretary General of the United Nations is a symbol of the international community and a representative of the World Organization. So his voice in the international community carries a lot of influence and a lot of weight. And the fact that he took the time to come to Pakistan at this moment, to show his solidarity and to appeal for assistance to Pakistan to recover from this massive disaster, and at the same time to remind the world that this disaster is not of Pakistan's making, it is the responsibility of those who have contributed to global warming, which Pakistan has not, and that we need to take action in support of Pakistan as a matter not only of humanitarian assistance but also of justice, of climate justice. I think that was an important message, and hopefully it will resonate in the capitals of the world, and Pakistan will receive commensurate help in building back better.
Ambassador Munir, as you rightly pointed out, this visit is a lot significant, is quite significant from its diplomatic aspect. But what would you expect out of, like a major takeaway, would you expect from this visit? Because it is happening on the brinks of 77th session of UNGA.
Right. Well, I think, first of all, this visit is important in itself, as the Secretary General speaks from ground zero of climate impacts and appeals to the world for massive assistance to Pakistan. That is an important message. Secondly, he has also used this disaster to illustrate the impacts of climate change. And that has been a constant theme which he has spoken of. He believes that climate change is the most serious existential threat to the world, to the planet itself. And he has used this as a call to action by the international community to respond to Pakistan, but also to respond to the proposals for action on climate change, on mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage that is suffered by countries which are impacted by climate change. So I think it was an important visit for Pakistan. It was an important visit, an important occasion for the world community to realize the seriousness of the threat which we face from climate change.
While you say that there is a lot of expectation, as I can see from what you just said, you have a lot of expectation from the international community, Ambassador. Tell us, how concerned are these rich nations that are primarily responsible for the carbon emission? Because Pakistan's carbon emission ratio is less than 0.5% of the global carbon emission. Certainly, we are paying the damages caused by other nations. So how concerned do you believe these nations are at the moment, because all of this is happening because of their own follies?
Well, they recognize their responsibility, but it is, as you know, the historical record is not so encouraging in their response. They have promised, the industrial countries have promised back 4 or 5 years ago at Paris to mobilize $100 billion annually as climate finance. They have not reached that target yet, and we have to hold them to that target. We are also asking that half of that money, at least half of the 100 billion that is mobilized and to be mobilized annually, should go for adaptation to enable countries like ours to be able to mitigate the effects, the impacts of climate change. And the third point, which the developing countries, including Pakistan, are pressing for, and which the Secretary General has supported in his statements in Pakistan, is a facility, a financing facility to compensate countries like ours for the damage that is caused by climate impacts. So I think these are the messages that he has carried. These are messages which Pakistan fully endorses, and we intend to work with the Secretary General to realize a response from the industrial countries, from the global community, to the message which he has voiced in Pakistan.
Ambassador, when you talk about the climate change, I mean, many nations, let alone other nations, we just talk about the United States, that back in the tenure of President Trump was not fulfilling the commitments that it had made internationally. But the way things are happening during the last several years, we saw a very harsh summers recently. We saw lots of forest fires taking place, and then this catastrophe that has hit Pakistan. Do you believe this will invite some more attention from all these nations, or do you believe it's time for them to actually do a bit more than what they have committed? Because the impression in Pakistan is that nothing more than words has reached down the poor countries that are taking the brunt of this climate change.
Yes, I think that it is quite understandable, the skepticism with which we view the words that come from some of the leadership in developed countries. But I think more and more they realize that they are being impacted as well. As you mentioned, there has been forest fires, there has been drought in the United States, flooding in Germany. So climate impacts are now spreading all over the world. And I believe that there is a political desire to respond to the climate impacts. But of course, every country's policy is focused on its own problems and its own priorities. And sometimes international solidarity for others slips because of national considerations. Our job, our effort, together with the Secretary General, will be to keep the focus on where the climate impacts are the greatest. Countries that are suffering, like Pakistan, which have not contributed to climate change. It is an issue not only of humanitarian assistance and help, but also of international solidarity, and in the long term, of international self-interest. Because unless we are able to resist climate change, to mitigate global warming, we will all suffer, including the richer countries. And we have to make that realization come to their people so that the policies will change.
And I assume that Pakistan's mission in United Nations is going to pursue all the commitments, all the promises that Secretary General has made in Pakistan, one of which was that the voice of United Nations will be the same of Pakistan.
Yes, of course. We are working with Secretary General It was in response to the invitation from us that he accepted to come to Pakistan, and we will continue to work with him very closely in order to promote response to the Pakistan disaster, as well as to work on the objectives of climate change fully share with him.
Ambassador Puneet Vikram, thank you very much for being a guest in our program today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Ambassador Puneet Vikram. We were having some audio issues in the end, but he made some very important points. The first point that was quite important is that this visit of Secretary General of United Nations not only reminds us of Pakistan's permanent mission pursuing Pakistan's interest and facilitating this visit at the time when the United Nations General General Session, UN General Assembly session, is about to take place on 13th of September. But also the fact that all these rich nations would be reminded of the promises, of the commitments, of the pledges that they have made to the rest of the world. We'll take a break here and we'll join you back with the second segment of the program. Stay with us. Ladies and gentlemen, today when Antonio Guterres was on a visit of Balochistan and Chief Secretary of Balochistan was giving him a presentation in presence of the Prime Minister flanked by several other cabinet members, there was a very important point made by the CM Balochistan, and the CM Balochistan said that we were caught by an act of God, on which Antonio Guterres said that this was not an act of God. We, the humans, are primarily responsible for the catastrophes that we face because of the climate change. Now, it's not only to the extent of climate change, but also the fact that every time when the flash floods hits the country like us, it reminds us of the lack of focus that we have had on urban planning. Pakistan's many cities are not as planned as they should ideally have been. And this actually exacerbates the crisis to another remarkable extent. On one end, you're facing unprecedented rainfalls, and on the other end, your cities, your villages are not prepared to deal with this crisis. So in order to talk about this very peculiar aspect of the problem, I've invited an expert of urban planning. His name is Dr. Nasir Javed, who is going to be guest in my program. Dr. Nasir Saab, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ji. Thank you for giving me the time.
Dr. Nasir Sahab, we are talking about the issue of floods, and we're trying to draw a correlative line between the floods and the lack of urban planning. So tell me if this is the case, or is it not the case?
Thank you very much, Ji. Urban planning, when we talk of floods, urban planning is actually just one of the mistakes that we have made, apart from many others. And when we talk of urban plannings, in fact, we are talking of many things. One, the point that is that yes, we know that because of the climate change, the rains and the monsoon rains and the floods are going to be increasing in their intensity. So we need to be prepared for that. But unfortunately, over the last 20 to 30 decades, 20 to 30 years, the way we have been managing, developing our cities is in a way which is actually contrary to what a good planning or preparation for these floods is. I'll give you just 2-3 examples. The water is actually going to come when it is rain, but it has to find a way through its natural channels according to the gradient until some channel which could be a lake or a river or a stream. Now, if we start constructing buildings, blocking those channels, the water, of course, has to find its way. So instead of going through, passing through those channels into the river or the lakes, it actually stands in our cities and streets and on the roads. So there are many examples. If you see, they just developed 2 years ago, you could see even in Islamabad, E sector, where we had blocked the water channels. A year prior to that, we had seen the same phenomena in Abbottabad, where unprecedented, unplanned urban development along the both sides of Mansehra Road, you would see, and that has actually blocked the nalas. So what actually is required is that whenever we are planning any development, it is not only just the cities or the houses, but even the roads, highways and motorways have to be designed in such a way that the natural passage of the water is not blocked. So this
I
is
would
one.
cut you here. I would cut you here, Dr. Nasir, with your permission. There are two different issues that we are talking about. As you rightly pointed out, one issue is the excessive amount of unprecedented rainfall that we had. And according to some estimates, this was the highest rain we have received in last 60 years. But the second issue is of the drainage of water. Now, what you are pointing out at the moment is that we have blocked the passages of water that water has naturally carved out of all these areas, and since we are obstructing the natural passages of water, this is exacerbating the crisis for us.
Exactly. So in any case, this unprecedented rains would have caused some damage, but one, that we could have actually reduced the intensity of the damage, and second, the water would have channels to drain out. At the moment, there are certain areas, developments in Sindh especially, where the water is stagnant and we really don't know how actually to drain it and where it should go. So this is what I would say has been the major. Apart from other factors, the kind of development that we have in, because of the concrete kind of the development and pavements and everything, the water that actually goes down into the aquifer and which is actually kind of a storage for us, that is also reduced. So these are some of the, while in the world, what they are going is to develop what we call the sponge cities. A sponge city is where the rainwater is actually captured and allowed to be go through seepage, through the surface, soft surface, into the aquifer. It could go into the aquifer, it could be stored in some underground storage tanks, but instead of accumulating it and rushing it through the streets or narrow roads, which we have actually made into canals, this is what could have been done, which I would again say will never eliminate the standing water for a couple of hours, but at least we can certainly reduce the misery of the people. And as you rightly said in the beginning, the rain is act of God, yes, but the damage caused is mostly man-made.
Dr. Shab, as we were discussing slightly before this program off air as well, you have rightly pointed out, and you were also mentioning something regarding the city of Abbottabad and this descent from Mansehra downward, which you showed me through some images, has been obstructed, and the obstructions have grown over a period of time, and perhaps this, you pointed out, was a major reason why the city became a pond of water. If my producer can show the images that you sent me.
Yeah, certainly. And if you remember the Ayub Medical College and those areas along Mansehra Road in Abbottabad, 5-10 years ago, they were never inundated because the water had a passage clean to go downhill stream. And it is very easy to see. In fact, anyone can go to Google Earth and see the miseries of past 20 years and visualize how we have obstructed these water channels.
Let's move forward. So, you were also talking about the rain harvesting, but the amount of rains that we have received, I mean, can we even think of harvesting this kind of, can we store this kind of water that we had? In case of Balochistan, as we covered in one of our programs, a place as big as a desert went under the water and roads were washed off. This was a kind of a volume of water that has never been seen in the past. What should be done about such a volume of water in the areas which are not normally accustomed with having this amount of waters in the past?
Oh, as I said earlier, that the amount of rain within the time period that it has fallen in, especially Sindh and Balochistan, is of course unprecedented. And the normal, whether it is the drainage channel or it is the drainage nala that we create, or the sewerage system, or even the standard rainwater harvesting mechanisms, are usually based on the past 5 or 10 years rainfall history. So this may not be, we may not be able to cover entirely through the standard rainwater harvesting mechanisms. But, and especially when you're referring to Balochistan, what has happened, this kind of water is usually, or could be at least, have some what we call the flood canals. If we know exactly through computer modeling and satellite imageries that if this kind of rain, which is very likely to come next year and next year and next year, so we should be having some kind of outlet, giving some kind of flood canals, which we don't open during normal season, but as soon as the water comes into our normal channels, we can open those canals, which lead to those areas where we can drain them. So this is two separate things. The standard rainwater harvesting, which is actually also part of the conservation of water as well. And the second is managing this kind of flood, which of course is a different ball game altogether.
Dr. Nasir Javed, if I understood you correctly, what you have said is that we require to get into a different mindset altogether. We need to reinvent our policies because Pakistan is a country that is rapidly urbanizing, and we see this lot of schemes coming in every major city of the country. The housing schemes are just innumerable. So we need to redo the entire planning mechanism for approving all these schemes. Otherwise, this urbanization will eat up all the resources that we have and will make these cities victims of catastrophes like this one.
Absolutely correct. And if you allow me to say, I would see that we actually need to adapt a very well thought out and well designed climate change resistant infrastructure and planning modalities. It should be applicable for public buildings as well. It should be applicable for all housing societies and even individual houses. And believe me, it is not just the cities that are badly planned and designed. Even our rural areas are expanding a kind called hodgepodge. Wherever one finds a space, 5, 10, 15 houses are built, which are usually not kind of protected against any kind of hazard. Maybe 50 years ago, or in the pre-partition times, there were certain rules where you can site the village. And the village site within the Mauza was usually located at a higher elevation so that if the flood or water comes, the houses are protected. Now because of lack, and that area was actually marked by Patwari in a Lal Lakir. Now anybody can build any house anywhere. There are hundreds and thousands of housing societies which are developed in Sindh, KP and Punjab, which are never authorized by the competent authorities. So we think it is a very normal process that yes, it is approved or it is not approved. But actually the approval process looks at all these things whether we are blocking these waterways or not. So you are very right, and in fact, the whole public sector infrastructure, especially at many places, the roads create a barrier in the path of the floods. So we need to have adequate channels below the below the road level, so that the water courses which are naturally along the gradient should not be disturbed. The water is
Dr.
actually not going to. Sorry, please.
Dr. Nasir, this invites your attention or attention to one other important aspect of the problem that we are facing at the moment. There are no rains at the moment, no flash floods, no new tide of floods again hitting the ground. But still, the basin, the downstream, the parts that are lesser in elevation in Sindh and in Balochistan, the districts that are at a lower altitude are still having a lot of water stored. Now, this water has come from all the places that were slightly higher in elevation. We have not been able to take water out of these places. As in case of Sindh, you might have seen in the news, when they cut to one water reservoir, it takes another few cities and the water is making its new baths. Now, can the technology, with the help of experts like yourself, help us to plan this drainage which we are facing at the moment? Because apparently we don't have a proper mechanism to take this water out, which is already in the steepest part of the country and is stuck somewhere.
Actually, if how this is done in rest of the world, I mean, we can learn from many other countries like Philippines, which have done really good work in protection against these cyclones and these water floods. Like what we need to know is that water flows along the gravity, no rocket science. Now we need to have a comprehensive mapping of the country, especially cities and water courses, areas where water flows through, which is called as the digital elevation model using satellite imageries. The digital elevation model actually provides you the elevation of each of the areas, and based upon very accurate computer models, we can actually predict that if it rains this much area would be inundated in it. So first of all, as per the digital elevation model and the satellite imageries and computer modeling, we should be able to identify which are the low, medium and high risk area if the flood comes. Incidentally, I had seen some mapping done for the river SYED, and in that, a couple of months ago I had seen that the SYED, along river SYED, the high and medium risk areas were marked as yellow and red. And believe me, the hotels and the damage has been done in those areas. So we can exactly predict where the flood is going to come, and we should allow no construction in that area.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nasir Javed, for being guest in our program today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this was Dr. Nasir Javed, an urban policy expert and urban planning expert, who was telling us how technology can help to cope up the challenges that we are facing at the moment, and how better urban planning can help us to anticipate or to deal the similar problems in future in a better manner. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's move to the last part of the program. And as I say most of the time, every major problem in this world either is an economic problem or has a very important economic aspect associated with it. Now, when it comes to the floods, as I said in the introduction of the program, it has serious implications on Pakistan's economy. I have invited an economic expert in today's program who is going to tell us about the economic problems that we are going to face as a consequence of this recent flooding. And I'm joined by Muhammad Shaf Najib. He's research fellow at Pakistan Institute of Development Economics. Muhammad Shaf Najib, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sabahat.
Muhammad Shaf Najib, tell us about the bleak economic situation that Pakistan was facing before the last week of August, and instantly all of this has happened. We were not in a very good economic shape. We were going through the rough patch of our economic history. Now, how does this flood will affect our economy at large?
Well, Sabahat, as I think this is something that has been said repeatedly, Pakistan was facing, as always, a very major issue of balance of payments. Our reserves have been depleting at a very fast pace, and we haven't been exporting enough ever during our 75 years, and that was leading to a default-like situation. We were on brink of defaulting, as the government has repeatedly stated. And we turned up to IMF for the 23rd time in our 75-year history. And while, after the IMF program got finalized, there was hope that maybe we can now begin a sustainability program. We can now start, maybe making amends in our things. However, the floods have made that entirely difficult now, because over 33 million people have been displaced. That's more than the population of 147 countries in the world. And of course, that has created communication issues through breaking of roads and bridges, and the road linkage between cities and provinces have broken up, and that has caused a major supply chain issue within the country as well. Along with the floods have swept away agricultural products. So there's a food shortage issue upcoming as well, and I think it's a very devastating situation for Pakistan as of now.
Shaf, we are more concerned. I mean, certainly whatever you said is a point of concern for us as a country and as a nation. But the problems that we are facing with regards to the infrastructure. Now, in many cases, we have lost the infrastructure entirely. As you pointed out, some cities are disconnected, and the bridges, the roads have all gone, have been washed away from the water. Now, how would this haunt our economy? How will this impede the development process in these areas?
Right. So, well, firstly, as I said, that the road network has been devastated, and as per the estimate, there are 6 million people who are in need of quick aid, whether it be financial aid, whether it be in form of food or clothing. So we are not able to get to them and facilitate them in these stressful times. But that also has resulted in a large part of our crops being swept away. Almost more than 2/3 of the rice crops have been swept away with these floods, while over 50% of the food crops, all of the food crops have been swept away by these floods. So that means that we should be expecting a food shortage in the country overall, as well as that is an economic hit for those people as well. The farmers and the people of these areas who earn their livelihoods on basis of these agricultural products. So I think this is we talk about 33 million people who have been displaced, but I say that the entire country has been affected, whether directly or indirectly, because the inflation and the supply chain issues and food shortages and the communication issues that are following the floods, and something that will, I believe, increase in coming months. That is going to impact all of us, and I think no country in itself will be able to ever manage such a devastating situation.
Shaf, people are not talking much about it, but I think this is a very right time to focus on the issue that we were facing before. That's the issue of balance of trade. Now, Pakistan's major export is textile. Textile requires cotton to be used as an industrial input. Cotton comes out of Sindh, and Sindh is under water. That is going to affect our exports, yes or no? Need your answer on it. Also, the fact that if we are going to import crops, as we have started to import some from Afghanistan and neighboring Iran on the terms of barter trade, how do you believe this is going to further strain our dismal trade outlook?
Well, I think you have pointed out a very important issue with this, because last year we had around $31 billion exports of goods, out of which $18 billion belong only to the textile sector. And textile sector is primarily, it gets its cotton that it gets locally, it gets from Punjab or Sindh. So around 30% of that comes from Sindh, 65, I guess, around from Punjab. So these are also the two major hit areas when it comes to agricultural land. Over many thousands of kilometers square of area of agricultural land in these areas have been devastated by these floods. And just if you talk just about the cotton, agricultural fields, over 2 million hectares of cotton fields have been devastated by these floods, which has resulted in expecting a further production loss of over 3.24 million bales. So before the floods, during this season, during this year, the expectation was that there will be over 9 million bales produced in Pakistan, but now that has been brought down to under 6 million bales. So I think that, of course, means that if we want to sustain our textile industry, we will have to further import these cotton bales. And will we be able to get enough? And will we be able to, sustain the export momentum that we have built up in the textile is quite questionable right now. And of course, that is going to hurt our overall exports and trade of balance and hence the economy a lot in the coming times. And especially if we also see how the water is not draining out as yet, and it's not expected to drain out in time for the wheat crops to be harvested. So I think that also is a major issue that we are going to face in the coming months. So the situation doesn't look good as yet.
Shaf, my last question. There is an estimate of somewhere between 20 to 30 billion US dollars of infrastructure losses. Now, all of this is done. We have seen very tough times to take this recent tranche of IMF program of 1.16 billion US dollar, comparing to a loss of 20 to 30 billion of dollars, to be back where we used to be before 26th or 25th of August when these rains started. How Pakistan is going to arrange it, and what if we are unable to arrange this amount of money from abroad?
I think that's a major worry right now, because the government estimates it at 10 billion, $10 billion of loss. Others say 20, 30. But I think these are just the loss that can be quantified. There are a lot more losses that we are going to face, in coming times. That comes to rehabilitating these people, rehabilitating the infrastructure that has been lost, and also covering up for the economic loss that the country is going to face and is already facing due to these floods. So I think this is something that no country on its own can deal with, because, as I said, over 33 million people have been displaced just by these floods. The entire people displaced during the year 2021 globally were not as much as this. So that's the scale of the devastation and what Pakistan is facing right now. So I think for this we need a global, you could say, reaction to this. The world powers, the global powers need to come together. The UN Secretary General is here in Pakistan, and I hope that countries in the region as well as globally will come to Pakistan's aid in this, because this for humanitarian reasons.
Got it. Thank you very much, Mohammad Shaf Najib, for being guest in our
Thank you for
program
having
today.
me.
Ladies and gentlemen, this was Mohammad Shaf Najib, our last guest in the program, and he has pointed out various economic concerns that this flood is about to trigger or is about to generate. Important thing, as pointed out by our second guest in the show, there are some serious decisions that we need to make as a nation, decisions that will help our generations to come to cope up the crisis of similar scale. We need to build up consensus on economics. We need to build up consensus on our urban policy making. And if all of this can happen, we can brighten the futures of our generation to come. But remember, there is a big if involved in it. We'll join you tomorrow again with another program. And until then, Allah Hafiz.